All right, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here this morning. Welcome to East Bay EDA's 2024 Economic Outlook and Annual Membership Meeting. I'm Stephen Bader. I'm the Executive Director of East Bay EDA. And before we get going, I just want to give a big shout out to our staff who helped make today's event possible. We have a lot of folks that we're going to be thanking. I also want to thank the Lafayette Veterans Memorial Center. And to get us going, I'm going to call up our chair, the Honorable Supervisor Keith Carson from Alameda County District 5, and chair of the East Bay Economic Development Alliance. Supervisor Carson, welcome, and let's give it up for him. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Did you have your coffee? Good morning. East Bay EDA has always been a very energetic organization. There's always a lot of energy in the room, so don't scare me by kind of dumbing down on that energy. I'm Keith Carson. I have the privilege of being the chair of East Bay EDA, but I also serve on the Alameda County Board of Supervisors, and I would like to also welcome all of you to our meeting this year. Our economic forecast meeting for East Bay EDA. How many of you have attended these in the past? Because up until the pandemic, we hosted them every single year, and they really gave us some insight, Bay Area-wide, California-wide, United States, in terms of opportunities ahead as well as challenges ahead by way of the economic forecast. So I'm looking forward to hearing the presenter today on that. For those of you who have been members of the organization, you know that we're very unique in terms of our structure. Not only do we have individuals who represent government and business, but also academia, the philanthropic community, the labor community, the community-based organization. So that's a fairly unique composite of groups. In order to look at how do we keep the Bay Area the best place to live, work, and do business, which has been the fundamental goal of East Bay EDA since we've been here. And as a result of that, I do want to encourage every one of you as members of the organization to be engaged in the organization. It is your organization, and as of such, we want to make sure that you participate in the structure of the organization. There are a number of committees that individually focus on subject matter that has a very importance to not only your particular business or sector that you work in, but also the region as a whole. Since we are a regional organization serving both Contra Costa and Alameda County, let me say that we do affiliate ourselves with the Bay Area Council, which is 9 Bay Area County-wide, and participate well with them in a lot of the studies that they do that impact this area in all of the sectors that are out there, as well as recommendations on how to go forward and make the Bay Area, continue to make the Bay Area the best place to live, work, and do business. I would like to ask the members of the officers to stand because I want to identify and have you identify with the individuals who spend a lot of extra time making sure that this organization continues to be what it is today. And I want to say a special thanks to all of the officers who've been spending a couple of times during the course of the month in deep thought and discussion about how to run this organization. And I do want to say a big thank you. As well as those of you who are members of our executive committee, raise your hands, because we have a fairly large, diverse, representative executive committee. Would you raise your hand? And board. There got to be more than that in this room. There got to be more than that. And let me kind of back off by saying the fact that we do have such expertise in the organization, it allows us to really do a deep dive on all of the issues that help to drive any community, be it in education and jobs and housing, and transportation, those very key indicators that drive the community. And as such, we also come together to address policy. And we do have a very active, robust policy committee, and For those of you, I hope that you've gone online and seen that we do have listed some of the proposed recommendations for upcoming ballot initiatives that are taking place. And that really is a result of us really trying to survey you as our members and also get a good understanding of what the cause and effects will be to the initiatives and ballot initiatives that are on our California ballot or in some instances on our local ballot. And we do have, under the leadership of Ed Baquero and others, delegations that go to Sacramento on a regular basis to interface with our elected officials, be it in the administration and or the legislature. So I want to encourage you to do that and get active. We also are an organization that has a number of events to make sure that we can share the information in person or online. I think this is our 9th public event so far this year, and we have one that's coming up in Fremont next month in the area of manufacturing. Very important, especially as we try to recapture some of the manufacturing that we've lost offshore. So a lot of exciting areas for you to be engaged, not to just show up at the social events or the updating informational events, but to give you an opportunity to help us shape the region that we all love here in the East Bay, both Contra Costa and Alameda County. Let me kind of conclude my remarks on this note. I've been very fortunate to have been the chair of this organization for a number of years. I won't say how long, but a number of years. And let me say that it really began, for me personally, this journey of being connected to this organization when I worked in the office of Congressman Ron Dellums. And I worked in his office for 15 years. Also, I had been a past business person myself, owning a number of businesses, and I was given the responsibility of attending a very important meeting over at the county building that included Ed De Silva, James, Zach Wasserman. I think maybe Ed might have been at one of the earlier meetings, and a number of people trying to make sure that we stay competitive here in the Bay Area by way of our port. And so we had to drain our port and get more depth so that we can be competitive on an international level with the ships coming in. And we convened the Sierra Club and a number of diverse businesses to ensure that we can maximize our efforts in order to be competitive in that area. That was kind of one of the founding meetings of East Bay EDA, led by Don Parada, who was president of the Board of Supervisors in Alameda County. And so there's been lots of growth and development from that initial meeting that kind of is reflective in all of you who are here today. But it's really been because of the participation of all of you over the years that have kept us together, and the incredible staff that we have. And I'd like to acknowledge the staff led by Stephen, if everybody would raise your hand, that do the research, and also plan out our activities and help us to get excellent panelists as well as speakers on any subject that we think is critical and important. A part of that ecosystem, as we developed East Bay EDA, moved from Alameda County to Contra Costa County being a 2-county organization. And one of the people who've been very important in that ongoing progress and development has been my colleague, Candace Anderson, from Contra Costa County. I see her in a number of iterations other than just East Bay EDA. We also serve on the Statewide Association of Counties, an excellent leader and thought leader in terms of making sure that on the civic side and the government side that things are happening as best as possible with all the challenges we have, but also understanding that we're a balance of making sure that business and academia and the philanthropic and the labor community is all engaged at the same table, even though in sometimes we may appear to be competitors, but we live in the same space, and how do we maximize coexistence in that space? The organization has had her as vice president for quite some time, and as we met, and it wasn't any real hard decision to make, that we came to the point where Candace Anderson will now be the new chair of East Bay EDA. As she comes up, I want to say I really am looking forward to your leadership and also your ongoing counsel to me that you've been giving for quite some time. And let me just say, without a doubt, we have an incredible successor in the spot of being chair of East Bay EDA, and you will only explode to higher heights under her leadership. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody, and really I should be saying aloha. Yeah, I am from Hawaii. I'm actually sixth generation to grow up in Hawaii and was just there this weekend celebrating my father's 94th birthday and attending a memorial service for an uncle. I do fly out of the San Francisco Bay Oakland International Airport. Thank you to the Port of Oakland for having such an amazing airport that is conveniently located for those of us in the East Bay and for being such a wonderful economic driver for the area. But I do have to thank Keith for his leadership that has brought East Bay EDA to where we are today. Oftentimes you see rotations in leadership. There has been no desire for rotation in leadership because Keith has brought such a strong, solid voice to what we need to be doing in the East Bay to continue to move forward. And we will miss him deeply, and I'm just so grateful for his service. So, moving on, I just want to say, let's absolutely. As you can see, today we have a tremendous, great set of business, community, elected leaders who are going to help carry out East Bay EDA's critical mission. And this is one of our signature events, something I really look forward to just get a pulse on both of our counties, Alameda, Contra Costa County, East Bay Unified, of how we're doing, where we're going, what our focus should be. Now, we know that many of you are here this morning to hear from our fabulous speakers and get updates on the economy, but I want to share a few things about our upcoming work with East Bay EDA. The East Bay is a big region, and just taken by itself, it is roughly the 20th largest metropolitan area in the United States. We have a very robust set of assets, resources that really are the envy of so many. Our housing's a little bit more affordable than in the South Bay. Our network of East Bay Regional Park trails makes it an amazing place to recreate. We have some of the best top schools in the state of California. It's a desirable place for both employers and, more importantly, for the employees that help our businesses grow. Now, along those lines, I am pleased to announce today that East Bay EDA has recently launched a new data dashboard on our website on www.eastbayeda.org, and this tool has a variety of demographic, economic, labor market indicators about our region, which can also be disaggregated for your city, for your county. East Bay EDA, to me, has always been one of the best partners to your economic development department within a city or the county, because we do have this data, these deep dives into this information. And East Bay EDA staff is going to continue to enhance, refine this tool so it will be even more useful. If there are things that you want, indicators that you feel are missing, that you want highlighted, let our team know, because we want this to be a tool for you as you recruit businesses and as you retain businesses and ensure that you have a workforce for your businesses. We need to have that information. Now, for the past 3 years, East Bay EDA has also been working on a project with funding from the U.S. Economic Development administration to help strengthen and support our manufacturing goods movement sectors. And that project is called Resilient East Bay. It was the subject of our 2023 annual membership meeting that we held last fall, where we unveiled a new website with great information and resources about the region's robust manufacturing ecosystem. And as we get ready to wind down the grant funds we received for this to really launch the work, we have organized a manufacturing summit. It is going to be taking place in the city of Fremont on Tuesday, October 29th from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Save that time in your calendars. It's going to be an exciting day where we're featuring discussions highlighting the microclimates of innovation, some cutting-edge workforce models, and international trade opportunities. What more could you ask for? There will also be an exhibitor area for manufacturers and partner organizations. And if you go to East Bay EDA and Resilient East Bay websites, you can get more information and you can register to attend. Now, one event that I hope all of you look forward to each year is our East Bay Innovation Awards. Now, East Bay EDA's signature event celebrates and spotlights innovative companies and organizations who are doing groundbreaking celebratory work right here in our region. And next week, we are going to be launching the nominations process. So start thinking about who you've been seeing in your communities, in your workforce areas that are really doing something innovative, something new that we may not have seen before. And we're revamping it a little bit this year to allow for an even broader array of companies and organizations to be recognized. So save the date. That's going to be Thursday, March 27th, 25, and we will be holding it once again in downtown Oakland. Events do take time, they take resources, and as we get closer to winding down our 2024 events, we do want to pause for just a moment and recognize all of East Bay EDA's 2024 sponsors and supporters, without whom we really could not make this programming possible. And so, long-standing East Bay EDA member, Bank of America, we want to thank you for being a title sponsor for today's annual membership meeting, and to Southwest Airlines, my airline of choice back and forth to Hawaii, for being our event gift sponsor, although I've never won any of those gift sponsor tickets. But one lucky attendee today's event, you are going to win 2 round-trip tickets anywhere Southwest Airlines flies in the United States, and yes, Hawaii is part of the United States, but you must be present when we announce the winner. And so here to say a few words and introduce today's keynote speaker is Daniel Schulman. He is the Senior Vice President of Business Banking and Market Manager for the Bay Area market for Bank of America. Daniel, it is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Anderson. Good morning, everyone, and a big thanks to Stephen and the East Bay EDA staff for putting on this great event. Once again, my name is Daniel Schulman. I run the business banking team here in the East Bay for Bank of America, and I'm also on the board of directors with the East Bay EDA. As a title sponsor, it's an honor for me to introduce our next speaker. So once again, thanks again for this opportunity. Bank of America is very proud, and I am very proud of our involvement in helping to strengthen the local economy as well as the contributions to the communities here in the East Bay and across the Bay Area. In addition to employing about 3,000 teammates here in the East Bay across to San Francisco, Bank of America's charitable foundation has contributed over the past 5 years about $34 million into the East Bay and again across to San Francisco in both the form of grants and matching gifts, and that's specifically with the intention of creating economic mobility here in our communities. And not only has the bank contributed a good amount of funding, but our employees have contributed over $3.7 million, and just as importantly, 147,000 hours in volunteerism to help the communities here. That means a lot to me. And for the East Bay to thrive, we all need to be involved. We need to be out in our communities. We need to be serving on boards. We need to be hiring locally. And we need to get out into the community and support the businesses, the great businesses that are here. And I know that's why we're all here today. So with that said, let's hear from our esteemed guest speakers. We're excited to hear today from Kate Gordon, CEO of California Forward. Kate is a national subject matter expert in climate and energy issues as well as economic development. Now, Kate said, just give me like the short version of my bio, please. Don't bore everybody with the long version. I could just say that we spoke beforehand and she mentioned liking an occasional Manhattan and a burger, but that really would not do her bio justice. So in advance, I apologize, Kate. I did pare it back, but you're gonna just have to bear with me because it's a really impressive bio. So first of all, California Forward is a state organization dedicated to a more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive economy across every region of the state. And Kate spent the past 2 decades working on issues related to climate change, energy policy, and equitable economic development. Most recently, she served within the Biden-Harris administration as senior advisor to U.S. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm. During her time at the Department of Energy, she focused on initiatives to help drive a more sustainable and resilient energy transition, including creating the Community Benefits Plan framework for DOE funding under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. And she continues to serve as Secretary of Energy's on the Secretary of Energy's Advisory Board. I'll get this out. Prior to her time in the Biden-Harris administration, Kate served for several years in the California state government as the director of the Governor's Office of Planning and Research and senior climate policy advisor to Governor Gavin Newsom. In this role, she launched or led several initiatives to better integrate climate and economic development strategy across the state, including the Commission on Catastrophic Wildfire Cost and Recovery, the region's Rise Together initiative, and the Community Economic Resilience Fund, SURF, now known as California Jobs First. Before entering public service, Kate was the founding director of the Risky Business Project, co-chaired by Mike Bloomberg, Hank Paulson, and Tom Steyer, and focused on quantifying and communicating the financial risks and economic impacts of climate change on key U.S. regions and sectors. Kate earned a Juris Doctor degree and master's in city and regional planning from the University of California, go Bears, and an undergraduate degree from Wesleyan. She serves on multiple boards. I'm almost done, don't worry, Kate. And she teaches a regular course on climate, politics, finance, and infrastructure at the University of California, Berkeley. Please help me welcome Kate Gordon, CEO of California Forward.
Thank you so much. That was a very nice introduction. And thanks to Bank of America from us as well, because they are a sponsor of our upcoming summit. So thank you for that. It's great to see everybody. I do enjoy the Manhattan and the burger at Wood Tavern specifically, which is about 2 blocks from my house. So live right at the Berkeley-Oakland intersection. My kids are in the Berkeley Public Schools. My husband works at UC Berkeley, so we are very much integrated into the East Bay, and I'm really thrilled to be here. So I'm going to talk a little bit, because I was asked by Stephen to talk a little bit about sort of the broader global context for the economic issues that we're all facing here in California and here in the East Bay and sort of across every region. And every region is incredibly different, as you all know, but there are a lot of interconnections and a lot of things that I think require us to kind of get out of our bubble a little bit and think about this global context in which we're all doing our work. So, let me just start with, we are at an interesting inflection point. We've had a couple of decades of really particular shocks to the economy that have resulted in this interesting moment that we're in of really transitioning to a new kind of economy. And I think we're all feeling that on the ground, and it's also being felt around the world. And those include, a pretty significantly changing relationship with China. Where I've done a lot of work, just because I worked with Hank Paulson for a number of years, and he has done a lot of work in China. Very, very different relationship, even over my time doing work there. COVID, of course, really hitting us all with the recognition of how vulnerable our supply chains have become, and that vulnerability being both because of our dependence on China, but also vulnerability just because we kind of got islanded by COVID. We have the Russia-Ukraine war, which dramatically has changed the kind of global energy mix and made a lot of countries, including our allies in Europe, feel very vulnerable and concerned about their increasing dependence on Russia, and then just increasing political attacks on the oil supply chain, which actually has mattered a lot. And you see the impacts of that on things like gas prices and food prices here at home. We've also had a series of economic shocks. You all know this very, very well, but really from the Great Recession and those impacts through COVID, of course, which have really deepened, as we've had those global shocks, really deepened inequality, the existing inequality in the system, and highlighted, again, that lack of resilience, especially among our more underserved communities and populations, and our less diversified economies, frankly, in large part our rural economies, really highlighted that vulnerability. At the same time, the inexorable march of climate change. I think we talk about climate change a lot in the policy world and at the regional level because we're constantly doing kind of net zero analyses and counting carbon emissions. But the reality on our economy is that the immediate impacts are really the physical impacts. And those physical impacts are not things we can control particularly easily. They're impacts from the last 50 to 100 years of carbon emissions, and they're very significant. Again, shocks to the system, right? So Hurricane Ida takes out oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico, changes oil prices. We have, of course, here at home, the wildfires, flooding, extreme heat, air quality, all of those things with profound human cost, but also profound economic cost. Every time it gets over 95 degrees Fahrenheit, labor productivity goes down. For outdoor occupations, for instance, we are increasingly spending disaster funds, public disaster funds, on addressing these issues, whack-a-mole issues as they come. Those funds are being moved from somewhere else. So these are increasing issues, particularly as we think about infrastructure investment. So all of that, I think, has led to an interesting moment and a march toward a kind of a thought about a different way of doing economic planning. And I say that, I think there's been a lot of kind of pieces of that. California, obviously, very early on thinking about climate change with Governor Schwarzenegger there signing AB 32. Green New Deal, kind of a sense that this economy isn't working, that we need to figure out a way to become more sustainable, become more resilient, find ways to actually capture the opportunity of these emerging green businesses. And the Biden administration and this Congress has really stepped up with, I think, an interesting political moment, right? You have the infrastructure bill, biggest single investment into sustainable infrastructure and resilient infrastructure in history, really coming together because of, frankly, anti-China sentiment, pro-labor sentiment, pro-domestic production sentiment, and a set of climate folks all coming together with this bipartisan alliance. Very unusual, but I think really a product of its time. So again, those shocks leading to this renewed focus on the need to build out a new kind of economy that's more sustainable, more resilient, and more inclusive. California leading on the regulatory side of that, less on the economic side of that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. I have a background in energy policy, obviously, and climate, but I actually think it's really, really at the center of all this. Energy is not only a necessary thing for us to have an economy, it's a foundational part of the economy. We can't be entrepreneurs without it. We can't have tech without it. We can't have manufacturing without it. But it also is increasingly a set of industries that's anchoring communities, right? So we're going from a period of anchor place-based fossil industries to a period of anchor place-based, diversified energy industries. And that is a really big shift, as we know, in Contra Costa, among other places. So what does that look like? I always love this slide. This is what happens when you Google clean energy future. Like, this is what it looks like, right? Like, it's like rolling hills, and the city's way over there, and, there's a couple wind turbines. This is actually what it actually kind of looks like. It turns out the clean energy economy is still an industrial economy. We have, everything from labs doing some of the early innovation on things like algae and biofuels, obviously the big renewable development, but also huge amounts of charging. I've got a biofuel refinery in there, this wind turbine, putting together wind turbines, it takes a huge amount of space, electric vehicles, down in the corner we got direct air capture. I mean, this is still a very industrial economy, which I think is important because it offers the opportunity to bring back some of those critical middle skill manufacturing jobs and supply chain jobs that we heard about earlier from Keith that are have been really the anchor of the middle, kind of the non-four-year college degree middle skill part of our economy that we've lost a lot of over the last 4 decades because of economic policy and globalization. There is a chance for some of that to come back. California is actually behind on this. We have been a leader on innovation and installation in the clean energy economy. We have not been a leader on production. We have absolutely the assets to be that. We have absolutely the ability to be that. We have not generally been, which I think is something really to focus on, and what California Forward is definitely focusing on this, and I think we've heard about it here as well. A little bit more on why that matters. It matters geopolitically. Critical minerals almost all coming from other countries, including some countries with whom we have very complicated relationships. And I think this is a critically important piece. These are the materials that go into all the batteries that we're using for just about everything. It matters because of equity. On the left, you see this is the most recent CARB graph. You see this all the time. I'm sure you've seen this a million times. It's the graph from CARB about how we've decoupled our economy in California from our carbon emissions. Carbon emissions go down, economy goes up. But on the other side, you see the inequality graph. And one of the challenges about that situation is that if we only use carbon emissions as a metric, if that's our only metric of success, then we do really well if we offshore all of our manufacturing. Because we have this artificial thing where we think carbon emissions are artificially bounded by the state of California. They're not. They stay in our atmosphere about 2 weeks and then they go global. But so what we're saying is, like, artificially, all the emissions are over there. We're over here being, happily having our economy. Unfortunately, that economy then is losing some of those critical jobs, and we're still importing all the things that are being produced elsewhere under a less significant labor and environmental standards. So, important equity consideration. Looks really different by region, and of course we're here in this region, which on aggregate looks a lot better than some parts of the state, but in general, regional unemployment is extremely diverse. In general, inland California has a much harder time economically. These things are getting better as the labor market's gotten tighter, but they still persist. And in the Bay Area, income inequality really significant. And you see this in all these charts. The growth of high incomes has grown so much faster than the growth of lower incomes. And that inequality really makes a difference, as all of you know. It makes a difference to purchasing power. It makes a difference to equity. It makes a difference to health outcomes and to safety net. Very different also by racial and ethnic categories. All these things I just talked about are much more true for Black and Hispanic Californians. So what does all of it mean? All of this means we need a new kind of economy. And there's a big move kind of globally, nationally, and I think in California a little bit catching up, to move to more of a just transition, to more of a place-based economy. So away from sort of Sudoku charts of emissions and of technologies towards something that's much more place-based and people-based, which really just means the work you already all do. Define your place here in the East Bay. What are your specific opportunities and challenges? Those asset maps, those opportunity maps, engaging with each other and stakeholders to figure out program development, to figure out what works in a place, taking a systems approach. An energy issue is also a transportation issue as we move from internal combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles. That changes the infrastructure for transportation. For instance, the gas tax goes down. How do we pay for it? All these things are very integrated. So taking that systems approach and constantly learning, admitting failure, admitting that we need to change the way we've done things in the past. So I'll talk a little bit about sort of the approach on this at the federal level while I was there, and then a little bit about California, and then I will be done. So how do you do a place-based energy transition? It requires a set of things. Planning, the ability to plan and do all that mapping and figure out what the assets are and think about what the future could bring that is competitive, that is sustainable. Laying the groundwork. In a lot of cases, we're moving from an economy that, again, a fossil-based economy to, an economy that was high carbon to another one that requires a lot of reclamation and remediation. You've got to get the land back to where it was in order to do anything with it. Investing in the new stuff, including the supply chains to get at that missing middle. And then underlying all of that, of course, basic infrastructure and workforce. This is basically the roadmap, right? The great news about federal policy for the last 4 years is that every piece of that roadmap is covered. Essentially, the planning part, actually the California Economic Resilience Fund, or California Jobs First, which I was very honored to be a part of when I was in the governor's office, was part of the model for the American Rescue Plan, the American Jobs Act piece of that Build Back Better plan, all about planning dollars. The CHIPS and Science Act, all about, so this is my former boss, Jennifer Granholm's thing. She always talks about these as part of the body, right? So the American Rescue Plan is like the heart. It's like working with communities to figure out what works. Then you've got Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It's the backbone, it's the structure, it's the infrastructure piece. It's also got a lot on reclamation and remediation. CHIPS and Science, the semiconductor bill coming in as the brain, right? We got to build the brain of all of this new technology. And then Inflation Reduction Act are the lungs that put the private sector dollars into all of it, because none of this works without private dollars. So this is the federal, approach. Pretty, when people say we are doing industrial policy for the first time since World War II, we are doing industrial policy for the first time since World War II. This is an industrial policy. There's no question. There's an executive order backing this up that lists critical supply chains for the United States, literally, and says we need to build these. That was the reason the CHIPS Act got passed on semiconductors. That's why the battery manufacturing money is going out the door. So it's an industrial policy. California does not have an industrial policy. California actually doesn't have a economic development agency, which is very unusual for a state our size. What we have is this interesting collection of things. As you know, we have GoBiz, which is not an economic development agency. It's a governor's office division. And why does that matter? That's like at the national level, if I said the National Economic Council to the president is the Department of Commerce. They do completely different things. One of them advises the president. One of them is an agency for the country, right? So we don't have one of these agencies. Every other state our size does. In fact, nearly every other state does. Every other state pretty much has regional arms of that agency, which then help disseminate, labor market data, competitiveness data, supply chain data, commute shed data to each region. We have a collection of very good economic development agencies and districts. This is from the EDA website, all of whom are amazing. You all are doing this work. It's just, it's not connected up into a state structure the way it is in other states, including Texas, including Florida. When I was in the governor's office, literally tried to do something about this by creating SURF and the California Jobs First. These are the regions. Totally understand everyone's mad at us about the Bay Area being one region, but imagine if you're in LA and how mad you are about being down there. But these regions were created really based on actual industry data and labor market data. But it's an attempt, but it's not a permanent structure. It's an attempt to create a structure that would help solve this problem. It's not permanent. We've got the metropolitan planning organizations. They do some of this, but not all of it. They do transportation dollars. They do some planning dollars. We are lacking this basic structure. We're very unusual in that. So that's important context for the work you're doing, which is that we have this regions up approach where the regions are kind of doing scrappy, as you know, Stephen, like scrappy work to try to make it all work together and aren't necessarily talking to each other the way they are in other states. All of that is context for your work. There's a lot of political context as well. I mean, I have to say there's the context, of course, of the presidential election coming up, where there is a lot of discussion happening about this question of an industrial policy and domestic production and bringing back manufacturing and being addressed in a number of different ways. There is a governor's race, of course, one of the most open governor's races we've had in years, happening in 2 years. And I think a really important thing to be engaged in, to be asking the candidates questions about how are we responding to these shifts in the economy? How are we responding to the fact that how we've planned in the past, which frankly has been a series of happy accidents for the most part. Dee Dee Myers from GoBiz will say this. We found gold, we found oil, we had a bunch of defense spending. We turned it into the internet. I mean, it's been really kind of an amazing set of amazing things that we've leveraged incredibly well. It hasn't been particularly planned. And so now we're heading into a time where other states are competing for the same things, the same dollars, the same manufacturing pieces, the same supply chains, the same, competitive approaches to a more sustainable economy. And we are a little behind. So this is the context in which we're now facing ourselves. And then I put spending in because the context is also, of course, a context of electricity bills. gas prices, and just a lot of money going out the door for consumer goods right now, and a reckoning with that. On top of that inequality I talked about, on top of that lack of supply chain, that is a really important piece of the puzzle. Contra Costa, in a way, is a microcosm of this. I mean, and I have up here the top. This is from the most recent tax report. You all know this well, but most of the top 10 taxpayers in Contra Costa are in some way fossil fuel related or energy related. There is, of course, a very active conversation going on about transition right now with the refinery. And I think it's an important thing to focus on because it's a great example of these companies did and have anchored economies. We do need to move into a new kind of economy where we need new anchors and a new tax base and a new way of planning. A lot of interesting work is going on in Contra Costa with the UC Berkeley Labor Center to bring community and labor and all the stakeholders that you talked about earlier together around this process. It is hard. It is hard work, as anyone who's involved in that process knows. But I think it's really, really a microcosm of what is going to be happening all over the region and all over the state going forward. So last thing I'll say, because I got to plug my summit, is we're actually talking about all these issues at the Economic Summit this year in 2 weeks in Sacramento. We're really talking about how we need to think differently about our infrastructure, how we need to think differently about our bringing back manufacturing supply chain. What does that look like? What kind of barriers exist? How does that look different across different regions? How are we thinking about workforce as we're doing that? And then an interesting and I think really important and controversial conversation around is housing affordable if it's not insurable? Let's have that conversation. So we're having a bunch of hard conversations with a lot of people from all over the state and really hope folks are coming. I think it will be a great discussion and I hope to see you there. And that is it from me. Thanks so much.
All right, I'd like to call up our Vice Chair, Mr. Ed Del Beccaro, to introduce our next speaker.
That's me 20 years ago. So it is my distinct pleasure, I'm the vice chair of EDA, and I have slides.
Sorry, my bad. Boom. There you go.
Oh, I'm going to introduce him. So I'm vice chair of EDA almost as long as Keith's been around. I'm also with TR Commercial, does commercial real estate. So it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Alexander Quinn, who's in charge of research for Northern California for JLL. He is an economic consultant. In fact, he does some of the very same studies that we were talking about missing for this whole area. He's a professor at Berkeley. Go Cardinal. And we're friendly competitors, but he is one of the most amazing, articulate about the trends, the economic drivers, and the research behind it. So, Alexander.
Okay. Well, while it's being set up, thank you for having me. I see Alex in the room, and he was my first boss at Oakland years ago as an intern for the redevelopment agency when we actually had redevelopment agencies in California. And I see many friends in this room, so it's an honor to be here. This is a I hope that you get the slides because there's no way you'll take notes on everything that we talk about here today. So first, I think one of the things you should always do is toot your horn. I know that Texas toots their horn quite a bit, and we should as well. As Jack London said, you can take paradise. I'm going back to Oakland. That's where I grew up. I have a long affinity or love of the city of Oakland as someone who's an A's fan and lament the last game, which will happen on Thursday, I believe. One question that I always ask people is, well, how big is the Oakland metro area? That's Alameda and Contra Costa County. Anybody care to guess? In terms of economic activity, we kind of heard what that was. It's the 20th largest metro in the United States. Anybody care to guess how big it is in terms of GDP? All right, I won't. This is a big crowd, so I don't. It's 300 billion is what it comes out to roughly in nominal sense. That's the size of Finland in terms of the total economy. So we're talking about 2.8 million people. Finland is 5.6, and yet we have equivalent GDP in terms of total value. or if you took the entire Bay Area metro and you thought about it, it's around $1.3 trillion. So that's the size of Indonesia, which is 276 million people. As you know, the Bay Area is around 7.6 million people. So highly productive region in the world, and one of the most highly concentrated economic engine in terms of innovation. So this is VC investment. Alameda County is $3.3 billion year to date. They reached up to $14 billion. Contra Costa County, smaller at $0.5 billion. But if you want to do a comparison, Austin, again, Texas tooting their horn, is around $2.6 billion year to date. It's always smaller than Alameda County. So I know that we talk about the innovation hub of Texas in terms of venture capital investment. It doesn't even come near what happens in the Bay Area. You have to remember that over 30% of all U.S. VC investment comes from the Bay Area. And then we were talking about Stanford and Cal. If you look at STEM grads, you can see that Cal's number 3 in the last 10 years, and then followed by UC Davis. So the UC system is very much strong and relevant in terms of STEM graduates. And if you want to look at founders, okay, Stanford does win just marginally. What is this? This is like 1,435 founders versus 1,433. Go Bears. So all I'm going to say, it's pretty close. Okay, they get a lot more money than we do. Surprise, surprise, but we're close on $47 billion. And then if you look at kind of the student population of Cal versus Stanford, I don't know how I anticipated this, but it's around 45,000 students. The average tuition is $14,000, whereas Stanford is $58,000. So little different. And we have 110 Nobel Prize winners versus Stanford has only 84. All right, so let's go into the national state of play in terms of what's happening on a national economy. And there's a lot going on. We have been surprisingly resilient within the greater United States economy. GDP growth has remained strong. Inflation is heading down, so things are looking better. Interest rates are coming down, as we know, but there's still an incredible amount of risk and uncertainty. So that sounds like a refrain from every economist of every meeting that you've ever gone to. Yes, this is kind of what's happening at a global scale. This is what we're seeing in terms of forecasts. So this is GDP forecast as it started in January. We said, 1.4%. So we expected a recession, probably in the second quarter of this year, and that didn't happen. And then we said, 2.2%. The most recent forecast is 2.5% in GDP growth, in real GDP growth. So that is good. And this is inflation. And inflation is, of course, coming down, as we're likely all aware. It's at 2.5%. It varies by region. Chicago, we just got some interesting data. They are at 3.7%, mostly associated with housing cost. Shelter is what's the delay. So the shelter cost is delayed also in how it's reported, but it's showing up in our inflation data, and that's really what's driving some of the lingering effects of the inflation over time. And there's an interesting dynamic that's happening within the greater U.S. and metro area, is that the Bay Area is actually not seeing the same amount of housing inflation that most markets have experienced over the last 4 years. So we're unique, and obviously that's associated with remote work. But guess what? In 2019, everything was $1. Surprise, surprise. And then what does it look like now if you take that current inflation rate by metro? You see markets that are more meaningfully impacted. So we hear a lot politically, of course, about the inflation effects. And those inflation effects are more materially impacted in places like Phoenix, Atlanta, and less so in the Bay Area. So it's in fact, we're seeing roughly 15% increase in San Francisco, Bay Area, versus in Phoenix, it's around 26% increase. So pretty significant variance. And as I mentioned, inflation is falling and is forecasted to continue to fall moving forward. So what we do know is that he's trying to put a rabbit out of his hat right now. The idea that you can have this soft landing is not normal. Historically, we have not done that. Historically, we have thrown ourselves into recessions when we increase interest rates too fast. Maybe Powell will be able to do that. The 50 basis points now, I think one thing that we keep getting fixated on is will it be 25? Will it be 100 basis points? I don't think that's as important. It's the directionality and the long-term consequences of inflation and whether we're able to maintain inflation and see real wage growth. And that's what we're starting to see in the data and suggests that we're actually coming out strong. There's still always lots of risk. But this is, I like bringing this up because this is the federal funds rate and over time what it's done. And there's forecasts that we do, and people in New York generally do. What they did is they said, okay, this is what it was in July. Okay, we'll be down to 4.6%. That was our forecast. Now in August, it was 3.9%, and now in September, it's 3.4%. So they're becoming increasingly more optimistic. So if you're seeing your 401k all of a sudden balloon, this is part of what's the reason why this is happening. So the forecast is basically assuming that rates are going to fall down faster, which means the equities markets see more growth in a present value sense. But we are seeing some softening. So this is hiring and quit rates. Quits are coming down. They really jumped, and hiring really jumped in 2020, 2021 and 2022. Now we're starting to see that come down to a much more normalized rate. So it's basically, if you look at the last hiring rate, it's roughly around 2016 levels, 2013 levels, and quits are down to 2016. So that's a more moderate economic situation. So that is the national level. That's a lot. I want to now go into the regional economic condition, which is even more difficult in my view. So for me, I think that there's a lot going on that's very unique to the Bay Area. And I have this conversation with my fellow brethren in New York, in Texas, and things that we talk about here are also exceptionally unique, and also they have a certain amount of envy in a sense towards the Bay Area and surprise that we still seem to work in our pajamas. So I'm going to go a little bit into what's going on in terms of recession recoveries. This is the .com era. Believe it or not, I know that a lot of people, well, some of you were here in 1999, and you remember that environment. And I always say that was like a crack high. We were going to come down at some point. It was obvious that it was way too high and elevated at that moment. And what happened? We did see it fall down. In fact, we didn't really see recovery in the normal sense until 2014. So it took a long time. But again, to assume that we would get back to 1990 levels is kind of absurd because it was such a ridiculous moment in time. And then also, if you look at the great financial crisis, well, that was a pretty short recession in the Bay Area because I think the iPhone was created in 2006. So things were actually recovering here a lot faster than the US overall. And this is the V curve known as COVID, where we saw a massive swing down. And then where we are right now is basically 2% below in terms of total employment within the greater Bay Area. So it's just lingering slightly below where we were. The US overall has fully recovered. This is a very interesting dynamic, and it deals with people who have left the greater Bay Area mostly because of affordability. Let's just talk about the total net change in employment. This is the East Bay. You saw a smidgen of growth in the East Bay. This is the Oakland Metro Statistical District. So this is Alameda and Contra Costa County. Marginal increase. Overall, we've seen the East Bay grow year over year around 14,000 jobs, mostly in the healthcare sector, which I'll talk about. If you look at the Bay Area overall, we started to see a marginal net loss. There's another thing that you guys should always talk to your businesses about is responding to the survey, the current employment survey. My God, I can't believe that we're starting to see really bad corrections, so that when we get information, we think that we're reporting the right information. We're not, because there's a correction that happens a month or 2 months later. So to the extent that you can get your fellow companies to trust that the government is trying to count the right things, the better, because it is showing up in all the correction data that I have to talk about. What we are seeing is that we're seeing growth in education and health activities, which wouldn't be a surprise to any of you here, and in government, basically kind of recovering from where we were. Areas that we are losing and where we have lost year over year is in the tech sector. So we're still seeing that hangover associated with the announced layoffs that occurred amongst Meta and other big tech companies, and that has actually shown up in the numbers. However, you look at month over month data, we're starting to see that in the greater Bay Area, we're seeing a slight increase in that segment, which is hugely important for us. So this is unemployment. Again, this takes over thinking of what's happened over since COVID. Huge spike. The Bay Area is still 4.1% unemployment. By any measure, that's a very healthy condition. I think there's a lot of perception that the economy isn't doing as well, but the numbers wouldn't tell you that we're generally a fully employed or full employment levels. And even in the East Bay, 4.6%, if you look at historic numbers, those would be considered quite strong. What we are seeing is this is office-related job postings. So in the white-collar sector, job availability, if you wanted to move, has become considerably more scarce. So we were able to basically get signing bonuses in 2022. That is no longer the case. You can't just hop to another employer. We're in a very different dynamic. If at the peak we were over 250,000 unique job postings, now we're at around 115,000. Also, if you wanted to work in your pajamas forever, guess what? Those jobs are starting to fall. So where we were at our peak, roughly 15% of all jobs that were advertised according to LICAS, which just identifies unique job postings, was just saying that they could be remote indefinitely. Now that's down to roughly around 8%. So, and that's falling faster. It makes sense. If you're going to be hiring somebody really expensive in San Francisco versus somebody, let's say, in Salt Lake City, you probably want that person in San Francisco to come into the office. And then we're starting to see those numbers change. The other thing that I talked about, I think a year ago, is that we would see population growth within the greater Bay Area. And in fact, we are seeing that. So we're starting to see net population change go positive within the Bay Area. Unfortunately, in Alameda and Contra Costa County, that is still not the case, mostly because of shrinking household sizes. So there are fewer people per household, and that's actually resulting in less people overall in Alameda and Contra Costa County. And it's driven by one factor, and this always blows my mind, is if you look at Silicon Valley, 39% of all people who live in Santa Clara County are foreign-born. New York is 36%. So, and San Francisco is roughly a third. So US average is less than 15%, just to give a perspective. So it's incredibly important that we have that inflow of international talent within the greater Bay Area and in the US overall for us to see that population growth and demand. And the other thing, we're driving. So this is bridge toll data that you can get from MTC Vital Signs if you're ever interested. And it just says, you know what, we're basically back. We're about 10% below where we were prior to the pandemic. So, and I know you're all experiencing this, so this is not a surprise to anyone here. However, we're not getting on transit. We're about 42% on BART of where we were prior to the pandemic, and that is slow to recover. So obviously, I think that'll start to recover as traffic gets worse, but it's not recovering as fast. And here's a really fascinating dynamic. We looked at shares of BART traffic and where we're seeing growth in market share, or you can think of it as where are people more likely to enter the BART station and where are they less likely to enter from looking at 2019 to 2024 data. And what we found is surprising. It's basically that we're seeing decline. If you're further out, you're less likely to take transit. So you're not going into Concord. You're more likely to take transit if you're going into downtown Berkeley. So that's also really fascinating. So that's kind of like the picture of the Bay Area or the East Bay economy. I'm going to talk more about the office because, of course, I'm JLL and we're a brokerage house that deals with office and industrial and retail space. But I'll talk a little bit more about what's happening on the real estate side. I think that's why I'm here. And what we're seeing is we are seeing increased leasing activity where this is U.S. overall, and this reflects what's happening within the greater Bay Area and in the East Bay. Tenant demand is recovering. So there is a reality that people thought we overcorrected towards work from home, and now we're seeing a reversion to the mean. I know that's a nerdy term, but all I'm saying is that, we thought that we could all live in our pajamas and work in our pajamas and eat in our pajamas. I'm going to go with the pajamas theme forever. But, I think it's what we're seeing is mostly that we're starting to realize that there are benefits to being in person. If my kids are any example, being in person at school is a lot better than being remote at school. We are seeing less sublease market continue to reduce. And then also we're seeing tenants gravitate to nicer buildings. And then, of course, one of the things that we're seeing is renewals are more likely than moves because the cost of capital is so high. So this is leasing activity. We saw it grow by 15% quarter over quarter. And this is what's called net positive absorption or negative absorption. So if you think of Die Hard, the building, I think it was it the Nakatomi? Okay, that building is completely unleased. So what we're seeing is if you're built in the 1980s, that's no bueno. That is not a good space to be in. We're seeing a lot of negative net absorption in those type of office buildings, unfortunately. Whereas if you are a newer building, if 2015 or 2010 or later, you still see net positive absorption in those buildings. So what we're seeing is a lot of negative absorption, especially in the ilk of 1980s. And those are getting refashioned in certain cases. But if you are a newer-ish building, you're seeing net positive absorption. And that's both here in the Bay Area and nationally. And this is the one thing that blows my mind. So the first one up here is the East Bay suburbs, which would be anything east of the hills. So think anything on the other side. That's how I look at it. Where we are right now, exactly. Before the Q4 2019, the vacancy rate in the East Bay suburbs was 14.5%, which was pretty healthy, and it has grown to 30% over that 5-year period. Or I guess it's more like, it's at 4-year period. And then San Francisco, which was the real estate darling of the United States, is no longer. It has the highest vacancy of any market in the United States at 33.7%. And we will report on our quarterly stats, so don't tell anybody. We're going to report on our quarterly stats next week, and it's going to be 34.5%. So it's actually still growing. So it is the highest it's ever been by any measure. But you can see all of them are going right. There's no one that's showing it actually being reduced. And it's kind of shocking to look at this. Silicon Valley also up on this list. They're definitely at 22%, is a little bit more insulated. And we actually saw some net positive quarters in Silicon Valley, driven by some moves by NVIDIA and others. All right, so I just wanted to explain the vacancy. So this is the East Bay suburbs, 17%. Downtown Oakland was at 9%, now at 30%. And really that'll grow to probably more like 38%. Sorry, I have to give that bad news. And then of course the suburbs are in fact going to increase as well because we've got Chevron moving out of their space. So we're going to see vacancy continue to increase. PG&E is consolidating to their Oakland headquarters, so you're going to see less space there as well. And then you compare that to San Francisco, which shot just straight up. These are the vacancy rates by market. I wish that I could capture every vacancy rate of every city, economic development professional. You'll get these slides, so hopefully your data is in here and you can reflect what's happening on a local level. But what I would tell you is that vacancy has increased dramatically across the board. In some places you'll say New York has a lower vacancy than San Francisco or the Bay Area. Well, Manhattan alone is over 400 million square feet of office space. So if you even see an 8 percentage point shift, that's a massive amount of space brought onto the market. So they actually have a lower vacancy rate than San Francisco, but the number is huge because in the greater Bay Area, total inventory is 300 million. So Manhattan has more inventory than the larger Bay Area. And this is just looking at Contra Costa County, same dynamic, more vacancy. There's some areas that have been more resilient. Berkeley, for example, has generally been more resilient. Downtown Walnut Creek has been more resilient than some other markets. And these are sales prices. So if you think about the blue lines represent the amount of sales. No one wants to sell in this environment. This is not a good time to sell. But if you're forced to sell, you're seeing prices down considerably. I'll give an example that we did in 550 California. 550 California is a Wells Fargo building in downtown San Francisco. It would have sold prior to the pandemic around $800 a square foot. It sold for less than $200 a square foot. So there are many examples of this across the board. You're seeing significant erosion in pricing. Generally, a new construction building would cost in San Francisco around $1,200 a square foot. You can buy a building right now for less than $300 a square foot. Many deals that are happening. So we are on sale. In terms of what's happening, you could see that another really interesting one is 180 Grand. I think that was bought for around $800 if I remember correctly. It sold for $108 a square foot. So what's happening? There's a couple things happening. One, of course, interest rates are rising. Demand is falling, and also there's no financing for these buildings. So what high net worth individuals are coming in and buying these buildings based on the basic principle of replacement cost thesis, which is basically, if I can buy something at 10 cents on the dollar, I'm gonna buy it. And that's what we're seeing generally because the banks are not nearly into the office buildings. And it's leading into some stress, some real stress, as you would imagine. These are all like CMBS loans that are starting to see how much delinquent loans are happening in this market, and you're seeing it grow basically more than threefold. Does this mean that there's a financial crisis just waiting on the edge of this? Well, if you look at it more in terms of the pieces, you look at office doesn't really represent a significant share of the total financing. So it's roughly around 22%. So that's not as big as you would think, and they're reducing their exposure and reducing their cost on this side. So it won't have as much meaningful impact is what we're seeing. Although there are a lot of loan maturities. It's roughly 22%. But you can see it's around 9.5 or a little bit less than, I think that's less than $1 trillion of maturities. Most of that's in multifamily and industrial, which is much more resilient, okay? And I know I was asked by Stephen to give a little bit about conversions and what's happening. And we are seeing conversions in the market on the office side, but it's almost exclusively at Bishop Ranch. It counts for most of this is happening specifically in that market and not anywhere else. And one thing I would just mention, if you just looked back, you would have seen that there was a lot of conversions from office to retail. That isn't happening as much now. It's more townhomes, as you're likely aware with Bishop Ranch. We're seeing a lot of move. Roughly 47% of all of it is going into either resi or about 40%, was that 40? Yeah, 40% towards mixed use. So I say all that, that gives you the office situation. And the thing that people think about is, well, the economy must be sucking then. Why is it, what's going on? And the truth is, that's not what's happening. Office employment in general is up. Vacancy is down. So we've seen this incredible decoupling. Me as an economist, I'm having an existential crisis. I don't understand what's going on. I can't forecast anything. So this is the dynamic we're in, and it's driven by this. It's like, this is Nick Bloom, who's a Stanford researcher, and what he found is English-speaking people are generally more likely to work from home as office workers than any other type of language in the world. And I don't know why, but we seem to be more likely to work from home than anybody else. And that is creating a lot of deterioration in demand. And here's an interesting thing that Nick shows. And this is 2022, so I'm sure this has changed a little bit. But this is the golf effect, which is that people are booking their tee times way more often on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday than they did prior to the pandemic. So that hybrid work environment is leading to incredible productivity. So I don't know how this is working out, but it's, I think this has probably changed a bit, but it's creating an impact. And here's some slide that he has for the greater Bay Area. You can see the areas in red are essentially areas where we're seeing MasterCard spending going down, and the areas in green are where it's actually growing. And what do you notice about this? Downtown Oakland, daytime population, 50% of what it was prior to the pandemic, right? San Francisco, the same. And that's impacting sales. And areas that are more employment-centric are more meaningfully impacted. So it's having a real consequence. And this is fascinating. So Walnut Creek, this is Placer AI data, it's cell phone location, it's Big Brother. So all of you with your cell phones and you have your location services on, we are tracking you. And we are able to look at your data and when you're coming into individual locations. So we use this to look at employees and how often they're coming back or not. What's fascinating about this is that Walnut Creek is actually 40% more active, downtown Walnut Creek, than it was prior to the pandemic. If you look at Pleasanton office spaces, those are the more like the Workday, those type, they're in fact similar to downtown Oakland, around 50%. So it gives you an idea of kind of the scale. Like if it's more monolithic, you're not doing as well. If you're in a more mixed use environment, you're doing better. So neighborhoods are improving. But this is not a fixed environment. So I'm asked all the time, well, what's the company's position on remote work? And I'll tell you what it is today, and it's going to change tomorrow because it's constantly fluid. It's not the single thing that's happening. Amazon, initially they said, we are definitely an in-office company. Then they changed and said, no, we're remote friendly. Now then they said, oh, okay, 3 days a week. And then of course you just heard it's 5 days a week. We're hearing that across the board. Many of these companies keep shifting. And what's fascinating about this is that their demands of office space also shift. So they're like, sublease that space. No, take it back. That's happening all the time. And it's not as methodical or as scientific as you would imagine. What we're learning is that they're learning themselves. And they also love looking at their competitors. If their competitors do something, they want to do it too. So this is what we're seeing regularly. And we're also seeing that they are being even more big brother than they were prior to the pandemic. So we're seeing a lot more of badge swipe data checks. They're looking at their IP address. They're also looking at, in the review, how often you're coming into the office. There's this example of the Google employees that come in just to San Francisco's One Market Street office to work out, to eat lunch, and then go home, but at least they swipe their badge in. So we're seeing that happen a lot across the board. Also, what's really fascinating is to look at, this is Placer AI data, the headquarters are definitely seeing a recovery. So if you look at NVIDIA, they've seen a climb in office participation. That's kind of a duh. Apple is growing. What probably was on the low end initially is Meta. They've grown back a lot, so they're roughly at 60%, which is 3 days a week. So it gives you an idea. And here's another really fascinating thing with the East Bay being kind of a anomaly, Silicon Valley, if you looked year over year change at job postings, office job postings, you would have seen in Silicon Valley a 5% reduction in remote job postings, whereas if you were in person is actually up 15%. If you look at San Francisco, it's down 16%, and in office up 4%. So that's kind of like where the rubber hits the road, right? That's where you're investing. The East Bay, down all across the board, but a little bit less so in remote work. I think that's also a shift of where office is happening, or where people are going into their offices. So I'll give my projection, and I'll just tell you, I present this in all humble pie. I don't know exactly where we're going, but I have an idea, and I think there's some positive things happening within the Greater Bay Area that make us on the kind of the leading edge of progression in economic activity. So just in terms of GDP per capita, I think we're forecasted to grow faster than any other metro. I think outside of Austin, maybe, we're on a GDP growth, we're forecasted to grow quite fast. And that's really driven by the existing ecosystem of our companies within the Greater Bay Area and the talent base that we have here. So if you look at us, you could see that Silicon Valley is forecast to grow by 9.9%. This isn't me. This is actually Oxford Economics, which is, they do like a top-down model from London, and they figure out which metros are really going to grow. And we always come in pretty high, driven a lot by our existing ecosystem. And this is labor force and labor force forecast. So if you take the Greater Bay Area, we reached our peak in the Greater Bay Area roughly in 2019, and now that's forecasted to recover equivalent to 2028. So we still have about 4 years to go. In the East Bay, because of our affordability, that number is likely just within the next 2 years. So in fact, the East Bay is forecasted to recover faster. And this is why. So artificial intelligence is talked about a lot right now. It's in our news, it's in our greater consciousness. And I hesitate to talk about it because it just seems almost repetitive. But as Sundar Pichai mentioned it, he said that what do you think is the importance of artificial intelligence to the economy? He said, I make it equivalent to the light bulb. So not small. And I think it really does show up in some of the numbers that we're seeing early on. So PwC had an estimate, it's roughly by 2030, a $16 trillion economy, growing at a rate of 18% per annum. And this is what's driving the new economy, as scary as it may seem. And this is scary, like the robot things. You can go down to the Stanford Research Park and you can see the Tesla robots if you want. It's kind of freaky, but you can see them there. There's also Figure AI also has their robots going as well. But really where we're seeing the growth is in not what I think a lot of people are talking about right now, which is OpenAI and Anthropic, the large language models. But think of your phones and all the apps that sit on your phones. Think of the things that will sit on top of the large language models. That's really where we see the demand and growth. So Harvey AI is one. There's another one called Hippocratic AI. It's an insurance AI. That's where we're seeing a lot of the growth and demand. In San Francisco alone, we saw over 40 new leases of new companies in offices in San Francisco, their first office that they've ever opened. So that's really where we're seeing a lot of the growth. And I think this is what's fascinating to me is when I look at artificial intelligence, venture capital investment. You take the Bay Area since 2014, the Bay Area has had more venture capital investment than the entirety of China. It accounts for 50% of all venture capital investment in the United States. So it is the epicenter. It is really the heart. I know we talk about Waymo, but it's more spread out than you think. And you can think of San Francisco being the software side, and you can think of the Peninsula San Mateo being the life science side, and you can think the hardware side as being Silicon Valley. And all of the San Francisco alone is more than all of Europe in terms of total VC investment. So it's massive. And it's showing up in our square footage. So you can see it now. We're seeing that we're at around 23 million square feet. There was the most recent lease that you probably read about of 300,000 square feet of the old Navy building in Mission Bay by OpenAI. That's an expansion. They're still expanding elsewhere and also in New York. So we're seeing still growth in that segment. So what do I see looking forward? I think first of all, we'll see more concentration within the Bay Area. Clustering is important for nascent industries. So that means that more people will be coming back to this area. Office vacancy, unfortunately, will likely increase over the next year and then start to phase out, start to lower. But first, we're going to see that increase. And also, rates are going to continue to fall. We'll still see growth in AI and semiconductor companies as they expand due to demand. And the labor force will grow, mostly driven by international migration. And then finally, the election will inform a lot of the advanced manufacturing demand within the greater Bay Area. And we'll see what happens. Thank you.
All right, let's give it up for Quinn. We do have time for a few questions. So we do have time for a few questions. We are going to have to use the mic. This is being recorded and will be on CCTV. We'll give you the date soon. And I see Ed has his hand up, and we will get the mic around to you.
I can talk loud. Fantastic presentation. How much is the affordable housing or lack of affordable housing causing the vacancy?
Yeah, affordable housing is why we saw so much flight during the pandemic, right? You can imagine that if you have a lifestyle, if you consider yourself middle class, being middle class in the greater Bay Area is a very different reality than being middle class in Salt Lake City or Bozeman, Montana. And so I often tell economic development professionals, one of the biggest things you can do towards economic development is build more housing. It is a fundamental constraint on the economy of the greater Bay Area associated with the fact that we do not have enough housing within the greater Bay Area.
Interested if you could speak to equity issues around investment and what folks here in the room can do as we continue to see that women-owned businesses and people of color are generally still underinvested. And in terms of growth in our region, it seems like that's where we need to tap into that untapped potential. Interested in your perspective on that?
Yeah, it continues to be a huge problem, and it's probably the biggest challenge that we face within California. It seems that the economy continues to push us into greater inequity. I don't know if, that's maybe a larger governance issue, but not easily resolved. That's what we're seeing, and I see it across the board. So those that are having the haves are getting more haves, and the nots are more nots. And that's obviously affecting a lot of political and governance issues.
Hi. Do you see the conversion from commercial real estate to residential, like in San Francisco, approved in 2023, having any impact on vacancies? Is there a movement towards that?
Yeah, so we did a little bit of an evaluation of that. It's a good question. And it's roughly, based on our best estimate, somewhere around 4% of potential. So it doesn't move the needle much. And essentially, the value of the buildings have to be at a land basis to pro forma, to pencil into that conversion. So for us, it's very difficult to see. What we see more likely are places like the shade lands, low density Class C, Class B type office space that could be converted entirely into townhomes. So where they tear down and do a total redevelopment. It's much harder to do a conversion. In my class, we tried to do one of 123 Mission, and it was ridiculously stupid. It was very hard because of the dimensions of the building. For those that don't know, that's the Jewel building that Jewel bought in downtown San Francisco. They are not occupied. It's completely vacant. So we just did an evaluation to see what it would take to convert that to resi. And even at rents at over $450 a square foot, we weren't making the thing pencil with a bunch of dead space that was turned into storage on part of the building. So I just tell you, there's a lot of constraints associated with any conversion from office to residential. And so it lends you back to more an office use. What we're seeing from Presidio Bay and from other developers is not a conversion play, but really the fact that they're getting this at a lower rate and they can be more competitive than people that have a higher basis. So they can ask for rents at $40 to $50 a square foot and also provide much more services like cold plunge and coffee bars and all sorts of wonderful things that they're putting in these office buildings when they get converted.
Kendrick, KP Doors. Forgive me because I've never actually had to form this question before, but based on lower occupancy in office buildings, based on the condition of the basic area, speaking of Oakland, homelessness, cost of living increasing, proximity to freight, proximity to rail, would it seem that, or is there any plans for that area to become much more industrial based off of that concept? Or is there a plan?
Well, I can't speak for the city of Oakland. I can tell you that there's demand. We do know that industrial demand for what we consider advanced manufacturing is quite strong and resilient. And I think people don't know the numbers. Actually, I have the numbers. So these are the industries that, and actually, we talked about this earlier. These are the industries that we think of in advanced manufacturing. And there's definitely significant demand in this segment. And I'll give you one other slide. Is it in here? This one. So I think a lot of us talk about the Bay Area as exclusively office, white collar jobs. That is not the case. There is a lot of manufacturing that is happening within the greater Bay Area. It's actually quite concentrated here. It's semiconductor, it's clean tech, a lot of pilot production. What's happened a lot though is that they've leapfrogged when they scale, they leapfrog out of the state of California because the time to market to get something entitled for a major production plant is so significant and the risk so high that it's much easier to do that in a different state. So it doesn't mean that there's not an opportunity in a place like Oakland for there to be industrial. And in fact, we are seeing some traction, especially in the flex R&D space near the Port of Oakland. We're still seeing growth in that segment, mostly on the clean tech side is where we're seeing that demand. The question is, will that be an enduring demand factor? I think the election is going to inform a lot of what happens. Yeah.
If you can raise your hand before the last question, so I could be right next to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Suli Kenyatta. I love that suit, by the way. Can you talk a little bit more about like the foreign direct investment opportunities that the Bay region may have in the next couple of years, especially with California being kind of the number one inflow? As these industries continue to develop, like what are some opportunities for foreign companies to establish here and kind of promote economic and workforce growth?
Is that more like the Visa? I forget it's called H1, which the H120, yeah. I think it's always an opportunity. Historically, we have been an intake of both investment. Most of us think of the investment going to Mexico, foreign direct investment, and it's something, when I would work in Mexico, that was a lot of what we would talk about is all the FDI. But yeah, I think there's definitely, especially associated with these opportunity zones, and the ability to also to get a visa is valuable. And I think isn't that what Colin Barron's doing in downtown Oakland is exactly that. Yeah, I think that there still continues to remain an opportunity in that arena. But I would say in general, it's not foreign investment that's driving a lot of the economic activity within the greater Bay Area. It's mostly local. Yeah.
Okay, about 3 people, so.
So thank you so much. My question may or may not be in your wheelhouse, but the nonprofit organizations that are involved with EDA and others are very dependent on volunteerism, which has been really, really tough since COVID, and highly related to companies and their DEI prospects. I'm wondering if you have any input on how companies, overall economy are looking at employee engagement, DEI, that type of thing.
I know it's still a thing. I think it's become less of an emphasis over the last 2 years. It was more of a hot topic, at least as far as I could tell, like in site selection, for example. DEI was one of the considerations that we would look at in site selection for located an office. There are some companies that I can't name. One was looking specifically at Atlanta because of that dynamic, but it's not necessarily, I think, as prevalent right now in the minds of the current C-suite, as far as I can tell, which is unfortunate.
Hey, Quinn, I have the Mike Gray presentation. Thank you. Wondering if you've modeled, I think we know that AI is likely to potentially double electricity demand, if not more. Have you modeled electricity cost increases around that?
We have not modeled electricity costs. It's a great question. But we know it's a significant item. And when you look at data centers and site selection data centers, electricity costs are considered in that evaluation. I think one thing that we're trying to grapple with is no one's really doing that forecast of the escalation in their estimates, which really presents a problem. And I think long-term, they have to recognize that, oh yeah, so the electricity cost in, I'm gonna give a random state, Florida or Tennessee is 30% lower than ours. Is that really an enduring state, or will in fact we'll see that number rise over time? And some of the ones that we're seeing, Florida wants to put data centers out there, which seems like the most absurd location for data centers, but that's also one of what we're seeing is cost. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Over here.
Once again, great presentation. And she just stole the primary question I was going to ask, but I have a follow-up, and that is infrastructure. We're starting to see an aging infrastructure, especially within our major downtown areas, and we're starting to see expanding demands both on energy, data, and even just basic utilities, with costs skyrocketing at the same time. How are you seeing that impacting our business movement, migration, and conversions?
I know it has an impact, but it's not one of the things when I look at companies that are located, they're not looking at it that much other than just the regional connectivity. And it does present significant constraints in new development, clearly. But, as far as, companies making decisions based on availability infrastructure, I would say that in general, they're just looking at the rail networks, the highway networks, and not really looking at some of the longer term consequences. Speed to market seems to be more important in the current environment than anything. Obviously, I think that doesn't have the long-term consequences could be much more meaningful. We're also seeing places that are growing really fast, they really are not accounting for that infrastructure necessarily. So we're seeing that a lot. Places like Atlanta, South Carolina, where they're not really accounting for the significant amount of industrial growth that those regions are going to experience.
Hi, thank you. Hank Levy, County of Alameda. I'm the tax collector, and the treasurer. So I'm thinking about government money. Both the treasury money and pension money, for the most part, go out of the local areas. They don't stay in. What kind of capital can we rely on to invest in our local communities, and any ideas about what government policies could help in that regard?
Boy, that's a very big question. I think always the constraints of the state of California is Prop 13. I don't know how else you get around it. I'm part of JLL, so I can't be against Prop 13, I can't be against Prop 13. as a person, I'd be against Prop 13. I mean, there's other things that you can do, the development fee process. There's not much development going on, so that's not really helping you much. You know, there is a stabilization effect associated with Prop 13 that makes it a little bit less of an impact when we see a decrease in values. I mean, I don't know if you know Professor Ted Egan, who's the head of Office of Economic Analysis for San Francisco, and his forecast on all this price reduction associated with these offices. You would think that there'd be just like a havoc. But because of Prop 13, really, they're not experiencing as much pain in these reductions as you would imagine. So I think there is going to be pain, but not as much as you would think if you were in another market. You would see a 30% valuation of what was before. That might have a real impact on your general fund, and it's not having as material of an impact because of Prop 13. However, in general, I think that it does have a significant consequence associated with us, and also we depend way too much on the extremely high income individuals, and that is a much more volatile segment than what we would have if we're a normal state.
Hi. Kashika McKinney with BART. Given the lack of ongoing, the lack of access to affordable housing and the decrease in ridership on railway transit and public transit, are there any policies that you would recommend to help to encourage transit-oriented development?
I think BART's doing a lot on this front. I think, you know, we're trying to reduce as much as possible, enforce the hand of cities to do development along transit. I live right next to North Berkeley BART. I'm really excited to see that there's going to be a development there at some point. For me, I feel like just additional strength at a regional level in terms of land use authority would help a lot. We're all driven by individually being afraid of the project next door to us. The more that that's done at a regional level, the better. I also feel like, I've heard of Seamless Bay Area, Ian Griffiths. I think that's a really good idea. Why we have such a balkanized transit system within the greater Bay Area is beyond me. If you go to Toronto or some of the other markets, you would see that it's much more consolidated and coordinated. And it's strange that we don't do that here. It seems like we really have an opportunity to do that and combine that with land use. So for those two things to work, you know, I'm trying to remember her name, Jennifer from the city of Toronto. She talked about all this amazing smart growth development and affordable housing. She's doing that all as a regional authority. You cannot do that in these individual cities the way that we work. We work so much in our individual silos that I think we work against each other.
This is going to be the final question.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Brenda Giese with Astound. You mentioned that San Francisco in particular had some problems with vacancy, continued decline, and what I would consider fire sales. It sounds like a real estate, but you also suggested that vacancy was going to continue to decline. Why is that if these buildings are up for sale and deals can be had?
Yes, because price doesn't matter right now. I mean, I'll give you the most crazy dynamic. You can lease a space in Transamerica. There are deals happening in the Transamerica building that are $200 full service gross. You can rent a building in mid-market for $20 full service gross. So you're seeing the spread is bigger than it's ever been. And it's driven by, one, that there's not enough demand to fill all these office spaces. All these spillover markets are more materially impacted. So downtown Oakland, mid-market, SoMa, that's where we're seeing a lot of the pain and the vacancy increase. And that's because you couldn't lease it out to anyone for any rates, because there just isn't enough demand for the amount of space that we're seeing. So until we get to an equilibrium point where the physical occupancy, that is people actually going to the office, matches the vacancy or the physical or the number of leased space, that until we hit that equilibrium point, we're going to still see that reduction in demand. And what we're seeing overall is that if you look at tenants, not AI tenants, but tenants overall, it's about a 20% haircut. So when they go up for renewal, they reduce their footprint by roughly 20%, all things being equal. AI is in a different type of dynamic. So I think we're seeing that play out, and it's playing out more materially in San Francisco just because tech companies move more quickly. What we also are seeing is a little bit of what I call that reversion to the mean. So Salesforce is a great example. They put a bunch of space on the market. I think that's going to change over time. And then some of the companies like Meta and Google, I think they may have overshot in terms of what their supply was, but now they're realizing maybe where they're hitting an equilibrium point as well. So you'll see some balancing. I'm actually forecasting net positive absorption in Q2 of next year for San Francisco. There's just a lot more pain that we are forecasting in places like Bishop Ranch and in Walnut Creek and Concord, mostly driven by what we know are move-outs already happening.
Let's give it up for Quinn. Thank you very, very much. We do have a token, a bit of appreciation for you, Quinn. And Kate, we have one of these for you too. It's coming right over there. Nina's got a gift bag for you. Thank you both. We're almost wrapped up, but I know some of you would love to have a chance to travel on Southwest Airlines. So I'm going to call up Peter DePascalis from Southwest to help us announce the winner of our tickets. Before doing so, I do want to just ask, how many of you are East Bay EDA members? Just quick show of hands. Okay. There's a lot of people who are not, and Patience is going to find every one of you before you walk out the door today. No, very seriously, do come by and connect with one of our staff. You've already met me. Patience is up here. Jackie and Xion are right up here in the front. I think Carlene's there in the back. Nina's over here on the right. We really want to make sure you have a chance to connect with us. I'm going to turn this off, and I'm going to let Peter and Patience go to the podium. If you want the map instead of your mug, you can hit the arrow and your map.
Okay, this one?
Yep.
All right, cool. Thank you so much, Stephen. Southwest Airlines is a proud partner of East Bay EDA. Thank you for allowing us to participate in this very informative event today. We have tomorrow's a big day at Southwest Airlines. We have our Investor Day. We have a lot of changes going on. For the first time in our 52-year history, we're going to start assigning seats, if you haven't heard. So. It's going to be good, I promise. And so in 2025, we'll start selling seats for assigned seats. And then we'll be reconfiguring the cabin. We'll have 30% of our cabin will be a business type product. 70% will be in the regular economy with the same distance that we have in our seats that we have today. The nice thing is we will continue to not charge for bags. So the bags, your 2 bags. So your first 2 bags will fly for free. We won't have change fees, cancellation fees. Those will continue to be at Southwest is what our folks still love, as well as they will love assigned seats. So tomorrow we're going to give a little bit more detail around that, of what that looks like. We're also looking at some international carriers to be partnering with as well too. So that'll be pretty exciting news too. So I think today we're going to give out, we're only doing 2 tickets today, so not everybody's getting tickets.
So one winner of 2 tickets. One winner of 2 tickets, right? So what it's going to be is we put in your names already. So your names were in, and you have to be present to win, obviously. So I'm going to call the name, and if you're here, you get the ticket. So there'll be 2 handed out, and each of them has is going to one person. Oh my God, let me be your +1, please. So the first person here is Elaine Charles. Is Elaine? Elaine was here earlier. I saw her. I saw her. Don't leave early. It's worth waiting. This ticket takes you to anywhere Southwest flies, so you can go to Puerto Rico, right? And Hawaii. Oh, what a miss. Okay. We have John Faustini. He was, okay, John was here too. Wow. Wow. Well, I know somebody who is in this room and who is so deserving and so exciting to talk to. I'm sorry, you're disqualified from participating. So, but this person is gonna be very, very happy. In fact, she told me she's so happy to be part of East Bay EDA and has been to every single function since her city joined. I'm talking about none other than Honorable Kim Truppier. Truppiana. From Clayton. And she has been coming to every single event since she joined. So Kim, you deserve this. Kim is the Vice Mayor of City of Clayton. There you go. Kim, we take that picture now. We were just talking about it. Let's take a picture together. Yes, please. Yes. Please. Steven, did you join? I didn't mean to.
All right. Got it.
All right, everybody, thank you very, very much for coming today. As mentioned, we will be sharing all the slides from today's presentation. This recording will be on CCTV and we'll include that information. Thank you very much and have a great day.